Greetings and welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. My name is Jonathan Foust. I will be leading the following meditation, and then we are going to move into a talk I gave a little while ago as I am on the road teaching. I will be back next week, but I think you'll find the next talk helpful. So without further ado, thank you for being here. I want to thank Glenn Harrison, our producer, for putting all this electrical stuff together so you are viewing this right now. Also to thank Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader for tonight, Ray Manioki leading mindful dialogue, the whole smorgasbord experience, 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. You can join Rita for mindful movement. Brings you right here to 7:30. We have our meditation and talk, and afterward, if you'd like to join up with some like-minded meditators, like-minded mindful maniacs, you can join Ray for conversation. It's a very, very cool thing. Thank you both. You can get those links on my website and on my Facebook page. So a thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for rolling this out. A shout out to my friends at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Arlington, which now has live Monday night classes going again. And just to let you know, as I always mention, I do have a mailing list where I send kind of a summary of talks, some resources, my best photography. I've got some pretty good photography this last month. It's been such a dramatic month. And as always, we receive no direct compensation for offering this. It's offered freely in the spirit of no one being denied access. And thank you for any support you might want to give toward making sure this whole thing keeps running. So, without further ado, let's move into a talk. And our exploration for this evening is cultivating a heart that can hold it all. So if you like, you might like to close your eyes and just, as you check in with your body, is there anything you need to do to kind of get the wiggles out? Anything you need to do to fine-tune your posture so that you can come into a comfortable seated position for like the next 12 or 13 minutes. And as you settle in now, you might take a few moments and just ask yourself the following question. What is happening right now? Take a moment, if you will, just to sense this whole realm of feeling. Notice the sounds all around you. Feel the air touching the skin. Noticing smell, taste, and the perception of light beyond your closed eyes if your eyes are closed right now. All of this sensations, all this data is happening without you having to do anything. And you might sense now the brain, this computer that is interpreting all this data and turning it into a narrative. And generating a flow or a stream of thoughts. Usually thoughts of liking or not liking what's happening. Thoughts of memories related to what's happening or future casting. Also, part of this flow is this realm of emotion, of opening to pleasant, closing down to unpleasant. And sense, if you can, behind all the movement, what some call the witness, the observer, objective, non-judging awareness. And with this sense, let yourself just notice what could relax right now. Relax, if you can, the inside of your mouth and your tongue. Feel the weight of your arms. Feel the heaviness of your arms. And imagine the sense of the weight of your arms inviting you into a deeper sense of relaxation and inner feeling. Notice now if you could sense the movement of your belly as you breathe. Could you, over the next 3 exhalations, relax your belly even more with each breath moving out? Feel the soles of your feet. And you may notice how the more you feel on the inside, the more there may be this sense of arriving, this sense of here and now. And you might bring your attention now to the breath, to the movement of the breath on the inside, or to the sound vibrations around you, or maybe to the feeling in the palms as you soften the palms. For these next few minutes, let your attention be centered on the experience on the inside. The movement of the breath at the belly or the nostrils, or the real-time sound vibrations, or any sense of pulse or tingling or vibration or feeling in the palms. Acknowledging that the mind will continue to generate thoughts. But when you notice yourself lost in a thought bubble, just very gently, can you bring yourself back to experience the here and now right at the point of contact with breath or sound or feeling. And you might sense when you notice your mind lost in thought, is it possible to associate a feeling of pleasure in noticing and re-arriving? Can you find some pleasure right now in softening inside? Or relaxing inside? Of feeling the intimacy of this point of contact with your anchor of breath or sound or feeling in the palms. Here and now. At some point, you might notice everything that's changing. You might sense in the foreground the breath or sound or the feeling, and in the background, this heightened perception of everything that's changing. And you might explore, if it's comfortable for you, to widen your awareness and to notice the weather systems, all the phenomena that's changing, and to ask yourself, can I let all of this be as it is? Can I take the seat of the witness and let things be? In these final minutes, you might refresh your practice. Is it possible to relax or soften even more on the inside right now? How intimately can you feel and make contact with your anchor on the inside right now? Can you sense this inner state of taking the seat of the witness? Is it possible to perceive what is changing right now and to let it be, to allow? And you might explore now, shifting your attention from doing to exploring even more what it's like to simply rest in presence. Allow all technique to fall away and just simply ask, what could relax or soften right now? What could let go right now? And very gently in your own time, you can deepen the breath. Let your body move and stretch in any way that feels good for you. This has been one of the busiest months of my whole year. I have been on the road, am on the road now. And with all that's happening in the world, I wanted to share with you this talk, which has had a couple thousand views. Some people have found it helpful. How do you cultivate a heart that can hold it all? In the midst of change, of turbulence, of suffering, how can we strengthen our capacity to stay connected to presence and to keep our hearts open? I hope you enjoy the following talk. Many blessings. I look forward to being with you again soon. I saw this line online a little while ago. It posed this question. If you could have $1 billion or cure all the suffering in the world, what color Ferrari would you get? It's a pretty cynical joke, but like all humor, it points to a certain truth. We tend to, out of our own sense of self-preservation, shut out the rest of the world. I've been in a really wonderful dialogue with a fellow by the name of Matthew, who posed a question a couple of weeks ago that has planted a real seed for me in this inquiry and my attempt to share on the topic here. Matthew works on the front lines in an urban setting, and he sees daily suffering and cruelty, and Matthew's a very sensitive soul, someone I really think of as a depth practitioner. And his inquiry was really put in this question or this statement. He said, I'd love to know your opinions on how we can hold space for people without absorbing it like a sponge and making ourselves ill. Thank you, Matthew. I've been really touched by this question, and I've been wrestling with this for a few weeks now. I kind of know the classic Dharma response, but in that same way, as I reflect on the suffering of the world and my own sense of self-preservation and what color Ferrari I would like to have, it's really brought up this really deep question around how do we respond to suffering? Suffering is both internal and external. And it really points toward the fundamental teachings around what the Buddha taught. When the Buddha was asked, what is it that you teach? Allegedly, he said, I teach two things, suffering and the end of suffering. So I'd like to base this little exploration with this short amount of time I have with you on these four basic tenets of Buddhist philosophy. Number one, the fact that suffering and stress and dissatisfaction is part of the human experience. Fact. The second, that there is a cause for that suffering. If you look closely, you will find a cause. Third is that there can be a release of suffering. It's possible. And fourth, that there's a path that leads us to a sense of greater and greater freedom. And as I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking about suffering a lot. And it's brought up this basic adage that comes from yoga philosophy that says where the attention goes, the energy flows. In Sanskrit terms, prana follows chitta. Energy follows awareness. And so human nature tends to focus on the negative. We have this built-in negativity bias that's designed to keep us alive. And I'm hesitant about going into all the litany around world suffering because attention sets up this flow of energy, and I don't want to traumatize you. But I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of suffering right now. The Mental Health America said that more people are suffering from deteriorating mental health in this last year than in many, 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 many years. They have these online questionnaires that they offer for people on anxiety and depression. And anxiety is increased 93% and depression 62% over 2019 totals. And while I think we all know about suffering, it's very important to recognize that it's there and we all experience it. And it's important to say that the Buddha did not say life is suffering. That's a mistranslation. But that human life contains suffering. Just as suffering exists, so does joy, so does compassion, so does kindness. So the interesting thing is, maybe we'll just do a really brief inquiry here, and if it feels like too much, just to ignore me. Or I just want to take a little look at how thoughts live on the inside. So if you like, you can close your eyes, or not. Many of us thought that COVID would be over by now. But when you contemplate the fact that we're now in another round of COVID and the variants, and when you reflect on fall and winter coming, how does that land for you inside? When you think about these months ahead with winter coming, can you locate how your nervous system responds to that? Where do you feel that? And for each of us, this response will be unique. Some introverts may feel some relief. Oh, I can stay home. Others may feel a clench, some kind of tightening inside. If you like, you can open your eyes and deepen your breath. I don't want to go too deep into the kind of the felt sense of suffering, but chances are that you may have noticed there's some kind of a clench, some tightening, whether it's concern for your health or the impact of COVID on your family and your loved ones, the impact on the culture, on the planet. We are these kind of resonant fields that hold tension and suffering. There's physical, there's emotional, there's mental, there's spiritual suffering. And, I wonder sometimes, are we suffering more now than before? I was very, very touched by my father, who served in World War II in the front lines. And the atrocities that he saw, the multiple wounds, the missing in action. In World War II, 75 million people were killed, either from deliberate genocide, from massacres, from mass bombings, from disease, from starvation. And my generation, we're in touch with that because it's our parents that went through it. And people I know, and people I care about, whose parents were in concentration camps. And someone said, racism was always there. It's just that now it's being recorded on video. When we look at what's happening on the planet right now, COVID, the social isolation, the racial injustice, climate change, wildfires, earthquakes, the rising of nationalism, it's really dispiriting, of course. And yet, there are those who say the world is actually less violent than it was before. There are those who say the first half of this last century was filled with extraordinary violence. World War I, World War II. And in the last 30 years, it's been remarkably more peaceful. The University of York in England, using these mathematical algorithms, looked at global deaths in battles since the Napoleonic Wars that point toward actually, and in some, that there are less deaths and more. And Dr. Steven Pinker, a cognitive psychologist at Harvard, he's written a lot on this. So maybe the world is less violent than it was before, but what about everything else that's going on? And kind of where I come to is that suffering is suffering. We all experience some form of stress and dissatisfaction. So the question then is just to reflect on, well, what is the cause of this? And I wanted to share a story with you because it was a very powerful moment for me in my life. For many, many years, like 15 years at least, I've been co-leading a program called the Energy Intensive. And I lead this with a good friend of mine, Richard Foust. And the whole idea here is exploring this relationship between energy and awareness. And as part of this, we do a very, very deep cathartic practice with breath. It's for those who are familiar with breath work, it's a form of rebirthing or vibration or whatever you might call it. But basically, you're lying down and you're doing a very deep inhalation, a very deep relaxed exhalation. And for many, many people, it brings up all kinds of undigested experiences in a very real and very tangible way. And the whole weekend intensive is designed around kind of this main event of doing this very deep releasing form of breath work. And just to say that we are no longer offering this program for a number of reasons, but primarily for health reasons with COVID and so forth. And so one of the things that I do, we usually have about 60 people in the room, and the level of emotional and physical release is extraordinary, truly, truly extraordinary. And we have people in little pods. They're like in groups of anywhere from like 5, 6, 7. Their heads are in the middle of the circle, and we have these wonderful people who kind of facilitate the breath work. And a few of us move around the room just to kind of support people as they're breathing. And in the beginning, I kind of go around and I kind of check on people to see how they're doing. And in one particular circle, there was this stunning contrast. There's a young woman from Lebanon, and when we send them out on break and we set up the room, and when they come back, they saw all the, everything laid out in the places where people lie down, and pillows and blankets, and immediately she went into a reaction because it looked very much like bomb shelters, where in Lebanon, as a little girl, she would have to go repeatedly to the bomb shelters. So she was already pretty activated before this. And there's also someone in her pod who I know who has always sort of struck me as like the classic model Aryan American, tall, strong, athletic, broad-shouldered, who had served in the Middle East and who also had been through a tremendous amount of trauma. And so as they both proceeded into the breath work, they both went into this very, very powerful process of making the unconscious conscious with experiencing really, really deep fear. And as I was kind of facilitating, moving around the room, they were both going through a very, very, very challenging time of kind of reliving trauma. And at one point, I had my hand on each of them, and this contrast of this young woman who looked about 6 years old, and this big, strong American warrior also going through intense fear and tears and release, holding the space for these two souls, so both at the ends of the spectrum. It was such a powerful reminder for me of how we all suffer, we all feel trauma. So chances are that feeling of fear and helplessness. there's big trauma and there's little trauma. Big trauma, being in a bomb shelter thinking you're going to die. Or defending the embassy and having someone in your crew that you're responsible for killed. And then there is what we can think of as little trauma. All the little places where you feel fear and helplessness that accumulate over life. And it creates this deep holding. So when we experience stress and suffering, it moves into anxiety. And anxiety is a normal reaction to trauma and stress. But when that is not released, when you can't release trauma, that clench becomes almost feels like a permanent tension inside. And it can manifest in all different kinds of ways, in depression, fatigue, loss of appetite, hopelessness, difficulty focusing, etc. And so, what is the root of suffering? According to classical Buddhism, it's something around identification. It's around holding on and the inability to let go. And for each of these two that I was with, that deep fear was creating an inner tension that was radiating just absolute fear and panic and overwhelm. There's so much to talk about around trauma, and I'll do that another time. But another form of suffering comes from desire, of simply caught in wanting mind. Another element of our suffering is on ignorance, that is to say, believing something is true when it isn't, or believing something isn't true when it is. What happens is it sets up something that can never be satisfied. And you might know what that's like. If you've ever experienced anything close to that wanting mind, or even into addiction, described so well as the hungry ghost. Hungry ghosts are these beings that have big bellies and tiny little throats. They just can't not get enough satisfaction. And we become identified with that wanting. So when we think about suffering in the world, and when I think of Matthew on the front lines, of seeing people act out in really destructive ways, it reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The primary need we all have is physiological: food, clothing, and shelter. And when we have that, the next thing we want is safety. We want to feel secure. We want to feel love and belonging, to have friendship, to feel part of a tribe. We want to feel good about ourselves, to have a sense of accomplishment, and ultimately, we have a need for self-realization, to know who and what we truly are. We are all driven by these needs. The need for the need for those who do not have food, clothing, and shelter, to imagine what that suffering is like for them. To those who don't feel safe. To those who feel alone. To those who feel like they are worthless. To those who are drawn to know what is true, what is real. It's desire that runs the show. And what Buddhism says is to stop the suffering, stop the clinging. But what Buddhism says is you can let go. And we know that intellectually, but of course, when we're in it, it's almost impossible. And yet, this truth remains. When you let go a little, you feel a little bit of freedom. When you let go a lot, you feel a lot of freedom. Hypothetically, when you let go completely, you'll experience complete freedom. And so this brings me back to being with these two beings, breathing and feeling their trauma. What did they do that cultivated a shift for them? Well, again, as Carl Jung says, consciousness or becoming more aware is around making the unconscious conscious. The other analogy, which I probably overuse a little bit, is the idea of a circle with a line through it. Above the line is what you're aware of. Below the line is what you're not aware of. When you relax and feel and pay attention, the line moves. And that's what each of these beings were doing. They were relaxing and feeling and coming in contact with the intensity of their suffering. And they found a way to stay with it. Part of it was their intention. Part of it was perhaps me whispering in their ear that they're doing great, to keep breathing. And they began to give it room. When we feel suffering, part of what these teachings say is to acknowledge the fear. Acknowledge the suffering, name it. And when you name it, you sever your identification with it just a little bit. And then sense if you can bring in mindfulness. Is it possible to bring in non-judging awareness? Can you hold it without judgment? Not easy, simple to say. Is it possible to bring a sense of compassion, to hold it in some kind of loving presence? Again, not easy. And is it possible to hold it with this sense of what we can think of as understanding interconnectedness? And for many of us, it's this recognition that other people feel this too. As personal as this suffering is, I am not alone in experiencing this suffering. Sometimes that can allow a shift. And I think for these two beings on the opposite spectrum, and yet sharing this common experience, as they could name it and recognize it, as they could continue to breathe and be with it, and to begin to call on loving presence, it began to shift. This sense of letting go, whatever you're holding on to, of letting it go, is a whole other powerful inquiry. Can we ever let it go, or is it more about letting it be? But I'm reminded of a beautiful process called the Sedona method, which was created by Lester Levinson. And much of what he offered in his work is this inquiry into letting go. And when you are in contact with something that's between you and feeling free or feeling happy, when you sense that suffering, to ask yourself first, what is it like inside? Can I name it? And part of naming it is not just a cognitive naming of it externally, but naming how it lives in your nervous system. And to bring a sense of empathy to it, and then ask yourself 3 questions. And there's something powerful about these questions. The first question is, could you let it go? Could you let it be? The second is, if you could, would you? And the third is, well, when would you let it go? And there's something about that inquiry I find very, very helpful, because it keeps directing the mind toward this possibility, the possibility of letting go. So I'd like to offer just a little reflection. And again, I'm going to also work with the word letting be in here, because sometimes I think that resonates more for me. So if you like, you might just close your eyes. And you might take 3 slow, deep breaths. And we're going to explore just a little bit here about your relationship to distress, suffering, dissatisfaction personally. And you might just bring into mind something you're anxious about. Something that you feel creates a kind of a clench inside. And you might just sense, can you name it? If you could describe it to another in a few words or a sentence, how would you describe the situation? And now you might begin to sense what it's like to move from the story to how it lives on the inside. When you think about this, where do you feel it on the inside? This is the wing of wisdom, of seeing it for what it is, sensing how it lives on the inside. And if you like, you might very gently bring your hand to your heart. And you might just simply sense what it's like to be with it. Perhaps to call on some form of loving presence, some kindness or empathy. You might reflect on how perhaps other people feel this too. And you might explore the following questions. Can I let this go? Or can I let this be right now? If I could let it go, or if I could let it be, would I? And is there a sense of when? When would you let this go? When would you let this be? Just take the next few moments just to sense in any way this may have shifted for you. If you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. One element of our contact with stress, suffering, and dissatisfaction is our internal world. And another is the external world, how to be with others who are intensely suffering and acting out of fear. I don't have any clean answers, but I do have some experiences and a few classic things I can share with you. Many years ago, I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, and one of the things that struck me was just a sense of overwhelming suffering. Being in Niger in West Africa, there was a lot of schistosomiasis, a lot of river blindness. And every morning, walking by my house, there would be small children leading older people from their village or from their family who would chant and sing. And when you would look closely in their eyes, they were utterly blind, and it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And so what these people would do is they would chant and sing, and in hopes of getting some kind of small alms. I had a little motorcycle in the capital city where I lived, and whenever I would go to do shopping and just going to pull my little motorcycle over to the side of the road, anywhere from 5 to 10 or 15 people would rush up and volunteer to protect my motorcycle and make sure it was safe in exchange for a cadeau, in exchange for a gift. And it was very clear almost immediately that there was more suffering around me than I could possibly alleviate. Ram Dass spoke of his time in India, of how wherever he would go, there was constant suffering and deep poverty, and he realized quickly as well that there was more suffering than he could possibly respond to. And he became overwhelmed. Well, who do I give some money to on the streets? And finally, he realized you just do what you can. In our response to suffering, it's very, very easy for the heart to close down. And what's called for is this mature, awake quality of consciousness, sometimes in the Buddhist tradition referred to as bodhicitta, which is the awakened and ripe quality of wisdom and compassion. And more importantly, is the balance of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom is seeing what's true, seeing what's real. Compassion is the heart's response to that suffering. When we are out of balance, we tend to either shut down or we tend to simply move into the wisdom faculty. At times I found myself taking refuge in that, simply being overwhelmed by the poverty of where I lived. And so I would say to myself, this country cannot produce enough food to feed everyone who lives here. This is just a simple reality. And so this is the suffering that comes from a population that doesn't focus on any kind of population control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes we err on the side of compassion without wisdom. And when we do, then we set ourselves up for absolute burnout. When you see suffering, you lose yourself in serving the suffering, and there's no wisdom. And on one level, and this gets really controversial, but when we're with someone who is struggling, part of what wisdom tells us is they are on a journey and they're learning their lessons. They're learning some lesson here in their relationship to those Four Noble Truths. And if I rush in too quickly, I'm going to try to learn this person's lessons for them. Maybe the classic example is when you see a toddler just learning how to walk. I was watching someone, and this really loving mother, who was kind of guiding her son learning how to walk. And whenever he would start to fall, she would be right there to catch him. And the person I was with, I turned to him. I said, does she ever allow him to hit the floor? That child falls, hits the floor, and over time they build their resilience and they learn how to get strong. The classic example of someone who they saw a butterfly emerging from a cocoon and they thought, oh, let me help. And what they realized was that when that butterfly emerged, that one wing wasn't fully developed because it needed that resilience to develop itself fully. So that dance of wisdom and compassion is not easy. But there is something about the Buddhist path that speaks beautifully around the intention to respond to suffering. And here we have the kind of the arising of the Bodhisattva vow. And the Bodhisattva vow is basically the intention to develop this quality of bodhicitta, the intention to develop the simultaneous co-arising of wisdom and compassion. So here is one form of the Bodhisattva vow. If you like, you might even just close your eyes and listen to this. May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitudes of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. If you like, you can open your eyes. And it's important to point out here that when I first heard that Bodhisattva vow, I thought, wait a minute, I'm dedicating myself to save 7 billion people from suffering? Well, the idea here is that this is sort of like the North Star. As you awaken in wisdom, as you awaken in compassion, there can be a profound shift in consciousness. The recognition that each of us are in our own journey, and that as we respond with wisdom and with compassion, we awaken this quality of the wise heart. This is not easy stuff, because what it really speaks to as well is the importance of keeping your cup full. And I know for myself that when I'm exhausted, when my energy is low, when I have no capacity to respond with any kind of wisdom, any kind of compassion, I am not doing anyone any favors. So the question becomes, is it possible to fill your cup to overflowing so that you can respond from that place of love and compassion? Is it possible to cultivate a strong back and a soft belly, as they say? Part of finding balance in your life is realizing when you can't be with suffering. We all need to sleep. We all need to refresh. We all need to step back. So my hope is, as you explore what it's like to open yourself to the suffering within and the suffering around you, that you can find this place of balance. This place inside where you can stay present to yourself and to recognize again and again this play of these four essential qualities, that stress and suffering is part of the human experience. And that if you look deeply into it, you'll see there's some form of identification. And when you can release that form of identification on whatever level you recognize it, something shifts and something opens. That you can begin to recognize for yourself this quality of awakened heart and mind. That your capacity for love, your capacity for compassion, your capacity for joy, your capacity for steadiness can begin to shine forth. And you can begin to feel the immense, immeasurable quality of heart. There's another beautiful rewriting of the Bodhisattva prayer that says, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, as a healing of misery, as a messenger of wonder, as an architect of peace. Sometimes the suffering around us is so deep, and we realize on some level we cannot fill that black hole. But we can, in our heart and mind, be a well-wisher of all. Let's take just a few minutes before we close. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might slow down and deepen your breath. And you might bring into mind one person right now who on some level is suffering. Just one specific person. And take a moment to recognize and sense how they're feeling, what they're needing. And in your own way, over these next few breaths, imagine that you can send them love, kindness, compassion. May they find the wisdom to move forward in their journey. May this person find inner peace that may allow them to stay open and awake to all that is most important to them in their life right now. Let's take a moment just to imagine the space around you beyond the furthest star. And imagine, if you wish, may all beings in all directions, without exception, feel inner peace. Feel safe. And feel free from suffering. Thank you so much for your time and attention. It's a joy to share these practices with you. I hope on some level they may be helpful and informative, and truly may we all feel free, may we all feel happy. Many blessings.